Welcome back, everyone. This is Chris for Geek Tech Live. This is episode 138, and in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about essentially something that basically crosses over from my real-life job into the show, and I think you'll be very interested in learning a little bit more about it. So without further ado, let's start the show. Today's show is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download at audibletrial.com/Geek Tech Live. Audible has over 100,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or other MP3 player. So head on over to audibletrial.com/Geek Tech Live now for that free audiobook on me. Okay, so a little bit of a teaser, obviously, in the beginning portion of the show, the intro. But basically, what I wanted to talk to you guys about is something that's actually kind of cool from my point of view. I was actually able to work on a couple of proof of concepts of this and basically play around with, essentially, you've heard the terms, hopefully you've heard the terms big data. You obviously know some of the big players out there that use this, such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon. It's all over the place, especially out west in and around the Silicon Valley and the major players that are there. So what is this, and what really am I trying to talk about? Well, I'm going to probably mispronounce it because there seems to be at least 2 or 3 different pronunciations of it. I did talk to someone at Cloudera who told me that they actually typically call it Hadoop. Now, technically I've called it Hadoop, Hadoop, what have you. But either way, it's H-A-D-O-O-P. Now, inside of Hadoop, this essentially, you can kind of think of it as an operating system. Hadoop allows you to essentially scale out into a true grid-style computer. And I'm oversimplifying a lot of it here for time constraints. I will be writing a small blog post that'll go into a little bit more detail. But for all of you out there that are even thinking about getting into the IT industry or doing anything with IT, this is where you want to focus your career. Look at, basically there's a couple of things that are never going to change. Everybody's going to need storage, and everybody's going to be dealing with large and larger numbers and amounts of data. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about multiple millions, if not billions, of records of data that typically would be housed in a database server of some sort. At a certain point, you can scale them to be that big, but the cost justification of being able to actually build a SQL server just stops becoming a reality at a certain point, and you start having to look at other players in the market. Now, there are 3 main players that are in the Hadoop market right now. There's Cloudera, Hortonworks, and a brand called MapR, which is owned by EMC, for those of you who actually know the storage market. So, what exactly does Hadoop allow you to do? Here's where it gets really interesting. Essentially, in a typical server, you have your CPU, your memory, your disk, and you can write an application, and your application either runs on the server or runs on another server and connects to the server that we're talking about here. That server could run a database management system like MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle, what have you. Now, what Hadoop does is, obviously, in the system I just explained, you have one server that holds your data and one server that holds your application, and you can scale it by maybe adding a load balancer, or scale it by clustering those servers into a sort of hot failover standby or active cluster if you're using SQL Server for a good example. But that still doesn't necessarily get you everything that you need. This is where Hadoop steps in, and why it's a really exciting new piece of technology. So Hadoop allows you to do a couple of things that you could never do before. And when I do say new technology, I really truly am saying that in most cases, other than the big players like Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., 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 there is a huge gap in the amount of knowledge and people that are actually even working in this sphere. So if you're apt and wanting to learn and able to pick up new concepts, especially if you're a Java programmer, you know Linux and Unix, and just want to even just learn more about how to be able to do this, This is where the future of IT is going to be going. And if you're going to ride it, this is, again, the closest you're going to get to being able to get in on the ground floor of something. So what does Hadoop or Hadoop actually get you? Well, basically, what you end up doing is, instead of spending all of this money on a big, honkin' huge server, you basically spend the same amount of money, but you buy multiple servers. So what does that get you? Well, it technically gets you a bunch of servers, a buttload of servers, if you will. And you'll have, say, 5 servers to start. You can start with a very small cluster of servers. In a typical server arrangement, even if you load balanced it, you're still sending a single instruction set to that server, and that server then responds in kind. What Hadoop does is allows you to actually write your code in such a way so that when you say, I want to read through all of this data, essentially you load the data as a flat file, completely unstructured, into Hadoop, and then Hadoop essentially takes, how many servers do I have, carves it up into individual pieces. So if I had 5 servers and I had a 5 gig file, each server gets 1 gig in a general term. Then you'd be writing your program. Your program says, I want to do simple addition, or I want to count this typical hello world in Hadoop is essentially a word count. Count every iteration of these words and tell me what that count is. Well, in Hadoop world, you write that program once, you send it into the cloud, and I hate using that term, but it is technically a cluster, a parallel cluster of servers. You write your program, you send it in, you say, I'd like to count all those words, please. It takes your code, and instead of sending it to one and then getting it back and sending it to one and getting it back, it actually splits that code, sends it all the way down to those 5 servers, and then sends the result set back to you. What that means is you're running on a much smaller subset of data, and therefore your amount of time that you need to spend to actually run through this data is extremely short. And of course, obviously that means that if something was taking you an hour before, it could, if it would scale linearly, it would take only 1/5 of that time. So again, I'm oversimplifying by a large margin here, but there's some really cool concepts to be learned. I've set up a couple of proof of concepts already and been playing around with it. It's extremely easy to set up. They have downloadable VMs so that you don't really have to even have your own hardware. If you have a big enough machine at home or at work, download the VMs, a couple of them, hook them up. You're not going to get the same sort of performance out of them because obviously they don't have all the individual data behind it. But the beauty behind it is it's kind of like, from a hardware perspective, think of Hadoop as you have a redundant array of disks, your standard RAID 5 array of disks on a server. Well, now take that up one layer and look at it from a redundant array of essentially servers, all acting as one big array of disk. So the servers basically become your RAID array. Your disk, you don't actually ever do anything with. You basically essentially just make a big JBOD sized disk, throw your data on there, and if you lose a server, it's not a big deal. You don't lose any of your data. Your data is essentially striped across the other 4, in this case, servers. So the beauty of it is that essentially it takes RAID up a level. And that's probably the best way to explain it to anybody, to be able to understand exactly how it works. There's a whole bunch of additional applications that run with it. Hadoop is sort of the umbrella of the actual software itself. Inside of Hadoop and around Hadoop, if you will, are ancillary programs and pieces that work. So you have your task masters, you have your task trackers, you have your name nodes. Then you have all the individual software pieces like Oozie and Hive and HBase and Flume and Scoop. All of those do all different sort of things. For example, Scoop allows you to take data in and out, even if you wanted to take it out of a Hadoop cluster and put it into, say, a SQL server, or take it from a SQL server and put it into a Hadoop cluster. You have HBase and Hive, Pig, numerous things. And Facebook, like I said before, is probably the bigger user of them. They have, at last number I've been hearing, I want to say 50,000, 60,000, who knows how many at this point, servers that they actually use to do their cluster. So when you're on Facebook, you're essentially reading and writing into a Hadoop cluster, not maybe 100% of the time, but most of the time it actually is being used. So it's kind of a cool concept if you really think about it. I would read up on it, and then if you're on Facebook the next time, it's kind of a neat idea. Okay, so I did say before I'm not going to be able to do this justice, and well, in the time allotted, I really can't go into a huge, great amount of detail. If you are interested more in this, do find me on Twitter. Do send me tweets. Leave a comment down in the footer of either Geek Tech Live's a posting of this, or on my YouTube channel, or directly on my Blip TV channel, and let me know what you think about, obviously, me talking about this. If you'd like me to go into more technical detail, or if you just have a question about how does someone get started in this, and how does actually someone get going in this. There's a lot of information out there, and surprisingly not a lot of people are actually doing a lot with it right now, except, like I said, at the big companies. If you're working in IT and you do anything with data, it does behoove you to pick up your mouse, your track pointer, your trackball, and check out Cloudera, Hortonworks, or MapR. Download their free trials. The majority of it are all essentially community driven at the base. Cloudera, for an example, you can have a 50-node cluster and not pay any money. Hortonworks is going to be releasing something very soon, and MapR is essentially another community-based version. They have two of them. They have an M3 and an M5 version of the MapR framework. Out of all of them, it's basically based off of, as a backstory, the Apache Foundation's version of Hadoop. So if you really wanted to go old school, check out the Apache Foundation. You can download every single piece of Hadoop individually and load it up on your own version of CentOS or Fedora or what have you. It's a really cool concept. I really enjoy playing around with it, and this is truly going to be the future of data. So if you really want to see what the big players are doing right now, go out, download this, and play around with it. You will not be sorry. Okay, so that's it for Geek Tech Live. This is episode 138. I've kind of run out of time, but if you do want me to go into more detail, like I said, please drop me a line on Twitter. I'm at Geek Tech Live. I'm also getting emails whenever you guys leave any sort of comments down in YouTube or Blip TV, where this video cast is actually being shown, as well as just geektechlive.com, right down in the comments section. I'd love to go into a more detailed dissertation about this, and I have no problems discussing it at length if anybody would like to do so. So until next time, everyone, hopefully I'll have some cosplay action, or maybe some a new giveaway to handle for all you guys. I am working on a few of those. But until next time, this was Chris for Geek Tech Live. We talked a little bit, very little bit, about Hadoop and or Hadoop, and all the things that are inside of it and how it's applied.